Tom Scott. I'd like to welcome everyone to the South Carolina chapter InfraGard's insightful webinar today on the impact of adding weapons detection systems. We are delighted to have you join us all today as we delve into a crucial topic that underscores the importance of enhancing security measures in our ever-evolving world. So in today's interconnected environment, ensuring the safety of our physical spaces has become more complex than ever, whether it's protecting critical infrastructure, public venues, private establishments. The threat of weapons in your facility poses a real and an immediate challenge. So there are hostile actors with nefarious intentions, often engaging in activities that continue to put our communities at risk. Throughout this webinar, we will be addressing the most common oversights experienced by our presenter, Shawn Reilly. We're lucky to have someone presenting today with Shawn's expertise. He is ready to share his insights with you. But before we dive into the heart of the discussion, let's go over some brief housekeeping instructions, nothing overly detailed, just so that to ensure that we have a smooth engagement and good experience today. So number one for a Q&A, I'll be taking and moderating today's webinar. Anyone have questions, please send them into the chat window. I'll moderate those, and at the end of the session, I'll circle back with Shawn to see what questions you guys may have had that we can answer. Number two, should you have any technical assistance, I will do my best. I come from the GRC side, not the technical side. Put your request in chat and I'll try and moderate. We will make sure that a copy of the webinar and any materials is available, given that we get a good production and a double thumbs up from our critics. We'll also, if Shawn's got any questions of the group, we may be doing some interactive polling. And most certainly, as you see others on the call that you may or may not know, feel free to network. We will be recording this so that we can, again, share it with you and others later. Please stay engaged. And as we embark on our journey of understanding better the impact of weapons detection systems, we want to thank you for your dedication to safeguarding our communities. And we now, without further ado, let's turn our attention to our esteemed speaker, Shawn Reilly. Thank you all. Let's make this an exciting webinar and an enriching experience for all. With that, I'm going to go off camera. I'm going to mute my microphone and hand over the program to today's presenter. Shawn, it's all yours.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate it. Thanks to everybody who's willing to spend a few minutes today. Hopefully this topic will be of some value to you. I've been doing risk assessments since the late 90s when I was in the Air Force, and continued to do that through my retirement to my civilian jobs, and now I do it specifically for tech systems. And in the past 10 years, all of our clients have asked one time or another about adding weapons detection systems. And in doing that, I found a number of common faults that would occur as people thought that this was going to be their answer. And I want to give you those faults so that you don't make the same mistakes. And at the same time, I'm going to spend a lot of time on the physical protection system and what you should be putting in place to have an effective physical protection system at your facility. And if you're a vendor of security, you should know this because you want to be able to share everything that goes into putting in an effective weapons detection system. And so, Tom, there for a minute, I was afraid it wasn't going to work. So we'll go over this. I'll tell you some of my first thoughts. We'll talk about who should be involved if you have an organization that's thinking about putting in a weapons detection system, and the layers of security and the physical protection system bullets. Those are the ones that we're going to go most in depth for, and you'll get to see a lot of that, how it affects in deploying a weapons detection system. And of course, here's if you know Blazing Saddles, here's what organizations think they're getting when they say, let's buy a weapons detection system. They put one device in at one door and they think, gosh, we're going to stop everybody right there. And that's really not what happens. And so the first observations that I'll be able to give you, if you get cut off after this point, you'll probably have gotten a lot out of the presentation. And of course, it's a more violent world. I do a lot of risk assessments for healthcare facilities around the country. And when I was a healthcare security director, we had about 10% of 3,000 hospitals had weapons detection systems. It's grown to about 10,000 hospitals, and it's grown to over 20% of those hospitals use some kind of weapons detection system. And of course, that's true in every industry. And of course, the next thing is the apathetic employee is your greatest vulnerability. No matter what you do, the people inside the facility are the ones that can cause you the most grief. What you permit, you promote. And that's will go when we talk about policies and procedures. If you let people violate those policies and procedures and there's no repercussion, it's going to be accepted throughout the organization. If you buy into technology, it will not work. If you're just trying to do that, you're going to find out that your head-end equipment won't support it, or the network won't support the technology because you didn't investigate it. You didn't understand how much manpower was needed. Your policies and procedures were out of date or non-existent. And those systems, once put in place, will fail unless you have a focused maintenance agreement or process to keep them running. And of course, over time, everything will return to its previous state. Employees will fall back into some bad habits. And most organizations are worried about their return on investment, but you really have to understand, when you're buying a weapons detection system, what is my total cost of operation? What is it going to cost me annually to keep this thing running? I talked to one other risk assessment consultant, and she pointed out the last facility she went to, they bought a system and it's sitting in the box because they couldn't afford to turn it on and put it in place. So what you want to do is be prepared. And here's kind of a little chart that I made myself. This isn't the based upon data or anything, but here's what everybody wants to reduce their risk. And what happens is, initially, you don't spend hardly any money at all to get a lot of risk reduction. But in the end, when you try to get closer to 100%, which you can never do, it costs you an extreme amount of money just to move a little bit. And so you want to find in your organization, what's your risk appetite? What are they willing to put into it to make that happen? And of course, the first thing that you need to do, if somebody says we need to have a weapons detection system, is to bring all of the stakeholders together. The facility leadership, the security folks, information systems folks, integrators, vendors, all have to work together to create a weapons detection system that actually operates within the physical protection system. And that is the most important piece that you'll hear, is everything you do up front is going to enhance your selection process. Now, I told you this isn't all going to be about the weapons detection system itself, but the physical protection system, and as I said earlier, the layers of physical security. And you'll see deterrence, detection, delay. People have given that 3 or 4 different numbers and added things and taken it away. There's also alarm. which is the trigger and the response. And those things we're going to talk about together, but you're going to have to know that deterrence needs to operate at all levels and starting from the outside, and that we bring in delay and detection, which must work together. You can't have one without the other. And then, of course, there's the alarm point and the response point. All of those work together to make an effective system. And we're going to talk about each piece. So deterrence, every layer. There's no hard, fast rule about deterrence. The best you can do is that you can't measure who didn't commit a crime at your facility, but the harder you look as a facility, the harder of a target, the less likely you could be a victim of crime. And I'm speaking of crime outside of active shooters, because there's going to be some specifics about that we'll talk about, because the active shooter is typically motivated to target a particular facility, got fired from a facility, wanted to take out people of a specific occupation or group, or even, I was trying to think of the Nevada shooting, where that individual wanted to take out a group of people just specific to be known for having done this. And that's the guy that you can really stop. He didn't have, if that hotel was a harder target, he would have had to go some other place and do it. Would he have killed all those people? He may have, if there was another high ground that he could access. But you want to make sure that you don't look like a soft target where your security officers are asleep. They look sloppy. They don't pay attention. They're reading the newspaper kind of thing. Your camera systems are hanging by the wires. All of that detracts from looking like a hard target. And part of this that I'm not going to talk about, and even though I'm certified in CPTED, the crime prevention through environmental design, I could do an hour on that alone, talking about it. Just know that there are things you can do. If you're building a building, you want to not only include the physical protection systems that are part of that, but also CPTED, the things that just through design make your facility safer. So I'll go on to that. And I am trying to move my, get rid of my screen here. It's blocking my slides. And so delay is the first part. You've got to use a delay on an active assailant who's reaching the target so the response force can get there. Every one of you have heard from the newspapers and television, hey, we had an active shooter. He entered the facility. It took the officers 12 minutes to arrive. And in doing so, he had the opportunity to kill a large number of people in 12 minutes, if you can imagine that. But if you can put in a particular delay that will help you, then that buys you time for a response force. And of course, you look at the active shooters in the past, and you see a majority of these folks go to soft targets that are not well protected, or they have a noticed vulnerability. And I say that by there was an active shooter, a 12-year-old in Nevada. And at his school, he noticed every day the custodial crew, I didn't want to use the wrong term, janitor, whatever's the appropriate term to use, go out at 10 o'clock in the morning, prop the door open and have a smoke. And so he used that prop door to enter the facility instead of having to go through the main entrance, which was locked. There's a whole number of situations that we could talk about where the barriers failed, but if they're in place and they have to shoot through a barrier or they have to break through a barrier, they're becoming detected at that point. And of course, if you put too many things in, I always think it's important to be able to say that if your system doesn't work, you're really operating from what? A false sense of security. And detection after delay. And of course, if you don't combine the two, you have a delay and that person's delayed, but they overcome that delay and just continue without detection. I did risk assessments for Air Force bases in the late 90s, and I would walk the entire perimeter because they'd put in millions of dollars of 6-foot chain link fence with 1-foot outriggers. And when we do our vulnerability assessment to that, we used 8 seconds for that fence as a delay to an intruder because there was no detection on the fence itself. And so you look at millions of dollars being spent for delays that are way out and undetected. What you really need to be able to do is bring that in and bring delays and detection together closer on that perimeter. There are many detection systems available on the market today. Weapons detection systems. I just came from GSX, and one of the weapons detection folks have just combined with the video weapons detection folks. And so they not only do point detection, they're capable of doing area detection, which is a significant in being successful at detecting an active shooter. And of course, the other area that technology's been used is in the gunshot detection, where within the facility itself, the not only the sound of a weapon, but the muzzle flash of the weapon can be detected through sensors and an alarm sent out. So detection from an active shooter perspective is like this. There's other detections if you're talking about other crime. And of course, I mentioned that when I was talking about how long it takes the police to arrive. But if you have a facility that has an armed security force, you can have an immediate response. And that may be what you need to have if you're talking about adding weapons detection. And I'll talk about that later in the presentation, because you don't want to send an armed officer to somebody who has a gun. And if it takes 20 minutes for somebody to arrive, really they're going there to write a report, not to mitigate any activity. So we want to make sure that those delays are in place so that it meets the response force's time to the area. And I want to include this piece. I wasn't sure where to put it, but I didn't want to leave it out. When I talked about bringing the multifunctional team together to decide about a weapons detection system, this is where you start. You take that whole group and walk the path that you believe a person with an active shooter is going to use to get into the facility. And it's from those points that you make decisions about deploying the physical protection system. Everybody in that group needs to start out in the parking lot and thinking like a bad guy, walk that area and be able to discuss it. Never relegate this responsibility just to security because it's their job. It really takes, the engineers know a lot. The head of many departments would understand more about where their employees park than you could ever imagine. And so bring them together in doing this for sure. Here's a little kind of adversary path process that I'll show you and kind of make a point. So the perpetrator's on the property. He causes an alarm, hits a delay, or the opposite is true. It can be either way, hits a delay and causes an alarm. And then that period of time, he then arrives at the target. Then he has time. He either departs the area or shoots himself or does whatever in that. So that's the bad guy is on top. Here's what happens with the good guys. They don't respond until there's an alarm. The alarm could be an employee saying something or a security officer seeing something. But that's considered the alarm, whatever it happens to be. And then they communicate that to the response force, and then they have to arrive. If you see that little bars ahead of the red bar, before he gets to the target. That's an effective response. If our security force, police force arrives after the guy has the perpetrator's arrived at the target, then really it's not as effective as we want it to be. And this is where we have to be concerned. This is where weapons detection takes place, and we have to focus on that. All right, so I talked to you about the layers of security: detection, delay, deny, all of that. And now the physical protection system goes into play. And these are the elements that you're all very familiar with. And we talk about, I'm from the old school. It used to be policies, procedures, equipment, and manpower. Now they've given it new titles. So it's operational component, which includes manpower and policies and procedures, security systems, which is the equipment, and then architectural, which is the barriers, locks, and lighting. And within all of those, they have three areas: preventive, corrective, and detective. And those three are kind of like, if you're familiar with any of the emergency management, you want to prevent something from happening, you want to mitigate it if it does happen, and then you want to find out how it happened and correct it. So we're going to look at each of these as we go through the next couple of slides. And of course, policies and procedures, I tell this to everybody I do a risk assessment with. This costs you nothing to put in an effective policy. But what happens is you may have a policy that we don't allow doors to be propped, but you go around a facility and you see that it happens. Or you've spent tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars on access control with electronic locks that can tell some operation center that a door has been forced open or a door has been propped open. And I tell you, every place I go, it seems to me that they have either turned off those alarms or they ignore them because there's so many of them, they can't keep up with them. And so what has happened is they aren't using their policy and procedure and causing a negative result to an employee that does that. The other piece was piggybacking, which people sometimes use piggybacking and tailgating as the same term. And I really believe it helps describe two different things. When an authorized person follows another authorized person, that's piggybacking. That's fun. Tailgating, which is illegal, is an unauthorized person following an authorized person. That's my opinion as you talk about those two actions. And of course, badge wear. I often find badge wear not enforced at all, or they let them wear it in the wrong place. So somebody who's not authorized isn't easily detected. If you had a robust policy on badge wear, a person who was not in there that didn't have a badge would stick out immediately. Now, equipment, we're here to talk about that weapons detection system today. It can be definitely an force multiplier of all that equipment we're going to talk about in a second. It enhances our senses. It does more than we can do as humans. And of course, we have to consider putting a weapons detection system in with all this other stuff so it complements each other. And we'll see that. And of course, there's a ripple effect if it's good, and there's a ripple effect if it's bad. It degrades it completely. And so first one is video equipment. And despite what I just said about the video weapons detection stuff that's in fact, most of the video that you guys have in place does little to stop an incident from happening. How many times have you seen on the news people shoplifting, people breaking into stores, and they just blatantly go in and do it, and then there's nobody who does anything about it. Really, if video monitoring can be reliable, if the people are monitoring it are trained and they have few other duties assigned to them. But what happens when I go to a security operations center? The people monitoring the cameras are also answering the telephones, using the radio, monitoring alarms, and they're really they have walls of video they never look at. And I've never been a proponent of having a video wall. A lot of people disagree with me, but that's my particular opinion if nobody's going to use it. But if you use videos that are programmed as alarms and they call up on that one big screen in front of you, now that's worth having a video for. Most of the video is used forensically. Somebody says, let's go back and look and see what happened. And as I said before, the video is now, people have video that detects weapons, or at least tries to do that. I don't think anything is 100%. Access control, the doors we talked about, not having doors propped open and somebody responding to forced doors and held doors. It's really important that somebody either only turn the alarms on that are important to the organization or don't have them, because alarms going off that no one knows what they're for are a true distraction. I remember going to having a security director, and we activated a call box to see how fast they could respond, and nobody ever got called. And so the security director calls the GSOC, and the officer answers the phone, and the guy goes, why didn't you answer this alarm? And he goes, I wondered what that noise was. And how can you deal with that when your people aren't trained, or there's so many other noises going on that it isn't important to them? The other part for many of you, we still use mechanical key locks, and 99% of the times I go to a facility, they'll have a key, a locksmith or somebody in charge of the keys. They'll have hundreds, if not thousands of keys. They can't tell you how many they have. They can't tell you how many have been issued out or to who. And several great grandmasters are missing. Dozens of grandmasters are missing. And that is truly a false sense of security when you talk about key locks, mechanical key locks to a door. Okay, and then the alarms, we're talking about weapons detection, but I didn't want to skip. There's perimeter protection alarms, call boxes, duress buttons, which are different than panic buttons, but all of those are alarms that are possible within the physical protection system. The big gorilla in this is manpower. If you're buying a weapons detection system, you have to put manpower against it. And these weapons detection systems, many times they recommend 2 people dedicated to the weapons detection system. And if you're doing that 24 hours a day, that's over 8 FT full-time employees. And if you're going to stop somebody at a weapons detection system, I would suggest you have an armed officer, since he's coming up against somebody who is armed themselves. And your response officers have to be armed. And in doing that, an armed officer is much more expensive than an unarmed officer. The weapons detection station, I put in a walk-through metal detector in 2006 at the emergency room at one of the hospitals I was responsible for. And I tell you today, they're still using it, but a person could walk through any detection point or run through it and begin shooting people with no notice. You just can't do that. I hate to keep talking about healthcare. I have a lot of other experience, but nurses in the ED who complain about violence because they have to sit face to face with a patient before they even know their mental state. And that's where they get in the most trouble. When you go into any organization, your receptionist and those other folks meet and greet people, have no idea what their mental state is. In a weapons detection station, you need to have something barrier there that stops them. And I suggest a bullet resistant barrier, but that is a lot of cost to that. And of course, the scenarios that we've talked about a little bit, an attacker can be an outsider or an insider, but most often it's somebody who has a grudge against somebody inside that company, the company themselves, and they have a direct knowledge of the physical protection system. As I talked about that child who watched those janitors prop those doors open every day. You want to make sure that when you're there, when you're creating a weapons detection system program, that you understand what is your threat. And at the beginning, I said, this group really, this multifunctional group needs to write down what they want long before the vendor shows up. Don't have anything in your mind other than this is what we want to stop. Here's what we want to do. Write those things out because you don't want to get sidetracked on a number of things that weren't your initial intention. So make sure that as you plan this out, that you have that discussion and document your needs in the beginning. And of course, one thing that you have to do is develop plans in conjunction with an active shooter. If you have an active shooter detection, you have decided that you need to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars in stopping an active shooter. Well, you're going to have a high probability of stopping one, but if you don't, how do your people react? Or if you stop the active shooter and they begin shooting at a particular point, you really have to conduct that training. And it begins with writing a plan. Then it goes to a tabletop exercise where your plan falls apart. And then you redo your plan and do another tabletop. And when you're happy with that, you go to a unit level. You train it in a particular units to make sure they understand it. Then step up to full-scale exercises that test all those plans, policies, and procedures and equipment. You also want to make sure that you've talked about and identified safe rooms for your people within their facility. And a safe room must have something inside it that helps them survive. First aid kits that also include blood clotting and tourniquets, bullet wound dressing, those kinds of things need to be thought through. And then when you're talking about making the system work, you've bought it, everybody was motivated, all of the folks that were demanding weapons detection system have become satisfied, and months and years go by, and people are going to fall back into old habits because good security is inconvenient. And these barriers that you put up to funnel people to the weapons detection system be seen as impediments to work or to leaving work, which is probably more common. And without an effective security motivation education program, all of these resources that you invested could be wasted because people fell back into bad habits. I do want to point out that even though this is a low probability, high consequence event, it could happen at your facility. And no matter what you do, uh, you need to plan for what happened. You need to plan for caring for the wounded, for people that have died. In a real, from a business sense, you could have people that are deceased that were critical to the mission of your organization. How do you continue on if they're no longer around? And there are people that are traumatized. I went up to near Virginia Tech and was doing an active shooter training, and this lady started telling me about how she worked for Virginia Tech, how traumatized she was over this whole process that was taking place. And I said, "Oh my gosh, you were right there in the building." And she goes, "Oh no, I was several miles away." But she still owned that event personally. And you have to create a plan for caring for those people. You also need to do a great job of communicating with the public when something has happened like that. Those plans and those exercises should definitely include how do we give out information to the public? Do we have a public information officer? How much is just enough information? You can't ignore them, but you can't be standing up answering questions for hours and hours. You need to be able to control the flow of communications. You don't want falsehoods, rumors and things to come out that are not true. So you need to keep that from happening. And then, of course, you have to reopen the facility after the investigation is complete. I was in Albuquerque, New Mexico, when the Blockbuster, somebody went in and shot and killed all of the employees there. It's now a park. It's never reopened. And so those kinds of things can happen. And of course, the reality of the event, people have to understand it, that people are going to die in an active shooter event. And what we're trying to do with an effective physical protection system is to mitigate how much that happened, because we can never be 100% on our denial of somebody getting in, but we can get close, and we can make it so hard. And what I'm afraid of is, if this person was fired and it was an HR person, they'll wait for them to come out to their car. If it was the CEO of the company, they'll find out where they live, those kinds of things. But what we've done our job as security leaders within an organization was to make our facility harder. And when we talk about those other folks that are still at risk, you have to have a threat assessment team that talks about how do we protect them here and at home if there's someone focusing a threat towards them specifically. And of course, as I said, there's never 100% solution. There'll always be some risk, and we can never have the risk completely gone. And if you try, Frederick the Great, though, you said, he who tries to protect everything protects nothing. And I think that's true. You get to your risk tipping point and you say, this is what we're going to do as an organization to complete that. And once again, just repeat that we're reducing that risk down near zero. At first, it costs us little, and then it's costing us a huge amount of money just to gain a little bit more security from that. So remember what your risk appetite is and where it falls. In summary, it's important that the stakeholders from the facility and the security work together to create that comprehensive weapons detection system. It's also that group needs to be able to create a threat assessment group that looks at the other aspects of weapons detection, is that protecting the people that may be specifically threatened. I always say you have to conduct a risk assessment first. That's because I'm selling my job here a little bit, but you have to know where you stand. Where am I now? And that only comes from being aware of what your threats, vulnerabilities are to your critical assets. And that's a risk assessment. You can do it in-house. There's plenty of tools. I think that every once in a while, anyway, you should have outside eyes take a look and see what you can do. And then use the physical protection system and apply it to all those layers of security I talked about, from the outer perimeter all the way into the target. And then walk the adversary path, drag everybody out there and say, let's walk out here. There's nothing in this world beats walking the ground. We learned that in the military, and I'm a product of that. And I've always been successful for having done that. And of course, enforce or create policies and procedures that harden your facility. That's free. Those things are free. It's so easy, it's hard, I guess. And then, of course, create plans, train and exercise, and finally motivate your people to stay with the physical security practices that you have in place. And that's it. That's the totality of my presentation. Any questions for me?
All right, I have no questions in chat of our participants, Jim, Jeff, or Joseph. We couldn't have planned that any better, Shawn, for that level of alliteration. Would you guys, any questions for our speaker? If not, I want to go ahead and share with you guys that this is part of the South Carolina InfraGard chapter's education and outreach efforts, as we are working to share information collaboratively with our members. So, Shawn, thank you very much for your expertise today. I learned a lot. I've known the term SEPTED in the past, but most certainly it's great to be around someone that's actually practiced it versus
Thank you.
knowing the term to pass the test. Again, thank you again, and everyone, we will be back in touch. We'll be doing this again next month. Thanks again, Shawn. Have a great rest of your day.
All righty. Thank you guys very much.